They tell you your wedding day is a blur, a whirlwind of white fabric, champagne bubbles, and faces beaming at you, all dissolving into a single, shimmering memory. And for a while, mine was. For the first 4 hours, it was perfect. Utterly, breathtakingly perfect. The kind of perfection you only read about in novels or see in the carefully curated squares of an influencer's feed. Our venue was an old botanical conservatory, a cathedral of glass and wrought iron nestled in a sprawling garden. The late September sun slanted through the panes, painting everything in honey and gold. It smelled of lilies and damp earth, and the faint, sweet perfume of 1,000 blooming roses. My dress was a masterpiece of silk and antique lace, with a train that whispered against the flagstone floors. It felt like wearing a cloud. I remember seeing my husband, Liam, waiting for me at the end of the aisle. His smile, it wasn't just a happy smile. It was a look of such profound, unadulterated relief, as if he'd been searching for me his entire life and couldn't quite believe he'd finally found me. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of our loved ones, I felt a sense of peace so deep it felt like an anchor, holding me steady in the currents of my own life. A life I had built, brick by careful brick. A life of stability, of success, of being the one everyone could count on. The anchor, the rock, the one who fixed things. That was the problem, of course. I just didn't know it yet. The ceremony was flawless. Our vows were personal, a little shaky with emotion. We exchanged rings, their cool weight a promise on our fingers. We walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, showered in dried lavender and wild optimism. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then came the crack in the glass. The reception was in full swing. The string quartet was playing a soaring, joyful piece. Waiters moved like ghosts, refilling flutes of Prosecco. Laughter echoed off the high, glass ceiling. We were about to be announced for our grand entrance into the main hall, when the great oak doors at the far end of the conservatory groaned open. The entire room turned, and there, framed in the doorway like a terrible, miscast ingenue, was my sister, Chloe Dot. She was an hour late, and she was wearing white dot. It wasn't just a white dress. It was a statement. A floor-length silk crepe gown with a plunging neckline and delicate spaghetti straps. It was, for all intents and purposes, a wedding dress. Not my wedding dress, but a wedding dress nonetheless. It was the kind of thing a bride might choose for a chic, minimalist city hall ceremony. It was a declaration of war disguised as a fashion choice. The energy in the room didn't just shift. It curdled. The joyful hum dropped an octave. You could feel the collective, unspoken question hang in the air. Who does that? I knew who. Chloe did. She paused in the doorway, a practiced look of flustered surprise on her face, as if she couldn't believe all eyes were on her. A slow, cinematic smile spread across her lips. She made her way through the tables, a ripple of awkward greetings and forced smiles following in her wake. She wasn't just arriving. She was making an entrance, turning my wedding into the opening scene of her own personal drama. I felt Liam's hand tighten on mine. "Just breathe," he murmured, his voice a low anchor in the sudden storm. "Don't let her have this." I took a deep breath, the scent of lilies suddenly cloying. I pasted on the smile I had perfected over a lifetime of her antics. The "it's fine, everything's fine" smile. The smile of the rock, the fixer. The rest of the reception became a masterclass in subtle sabotage. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. During my father's tearful speech, her laugh, a loud theatrical bray, rang out at an inappropriate moment, drawing every eye. When the photographer was trying to organize a group shot of my college friends, she slithered her way into the center, linking her arm through mine, positioning herself as a co-hostess, a second bride. She cornered Liam's boss, a man she'd never met, and held him captive for 20 minutes with a dramatic and likely fabricated story about her struggles as a misunderstood artist. With every calculated disruption, I could feel a piece of my perfect day flaking away. I was no longer the bride. I was a spectator at the Chloe show, featuring a special guest appearance by my wedding. My mother, of course, was her willing accomplice, floating in her orbit like a devoted moon. "Oh, that's just Chloe," she'd say, with a dismissive wave of her hand whenever someone shot a questioning look. "She's so passionate. She just feels everything so deeply." What she felt deeply was a pathological need for the spotlight. I had been her supporting cast my entire life. I was the responsible one who got the scholarships, who worked 2 jobs in college, who built a career in finance. I was the one who paid for her artistic lifestyle, her downtown loft apartment, her graduate school tuition, her unpaid credit card bills. I was the stable ground from which she could launch her endless flights of fancy and her endless campaigns for attention. My success wasn't a source of pride for her, it was a resource. And my wedding, the ultimate celebration of a life I had built without her at the center, was an act of rebellion she simply could not tolerate. The final act came near the end of the night. The band was playing a soft, slow number. Couples were swaying on the dance floor, lost in the romantic haze. My feet ached. My smile was stretched thin, but I thought I had made it. I had weathered the storm. Then I saw her pick up a microphone. A hush fell over the room. Chloe stood there, a full glass of deep, blood-red Cabernet in her hand. She beamed, that brilliant, false smile dazzling the room. "I'd just like to make a toast," she announced, her voice ringing with performative sincerity. "To my big sister, Ilara." She turned her head and looked directly at me. For a split second, the mask dropped. I saw it. I saw the raw, unvarnished envy, the years of simmering resentment. It was cold and sharp and utterly terrifying. "We all know she is the perfect one," she continued, her voice dripping with a sweetness so saccharine it was acidic. "The one who always does the right thing. The one who takes care of everyone. The one who built this perfect life." She raised her glass higher. Liam's hand was a vice on my back. I could feel every muscle in my body tense. This was it. The main event. The grand finale. Her eyes cold and bright, locked with mine. And then she delivered the line she had been rehearsing all night. "Here's to the family fraud and white." And with a flick of her wrist, a movement as deliberate and practiced as a ballerina's, she threw the entire glass of red wine onto the front of my dress. The music cuts out abruptly, replaced by a sharp, ringing silence. The world went into slow motion. I watched the dark liquid arc through the air, a ruby comet on a collision course with my future. It hit the bodice of my dress with a soft, wet slap. The stain bloomed instantly, a horrific, jagged wound spreading across the pristine white lace. It snaked down the silk, dripping onto the floor in dark, accusing pools. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a sound I will never forget. A sound of shared shock, of disbelief, of second-hand violation. And then, just as quickly, another sound. My mother's voice, high and frantic. "Oh my God, Chloe, you are so clumsy." She rushed not to me, but to Chloe, wrapping an arm around her. "She didn't mean it," my mother announced to the stunned crowd, already rewriting the narrative. "She's just had a little too much to drink. She would never." But I wasn't listening. I was staring at the stain. This Rorschach test of my sister's soul, splattered across my heart. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't clumsiness. It was a signature. An act of pure, unadulterated malice, delivered on the happiest day of my life. Something inside me, something that had been bent and strained and stretched for 32 years, did not break. It solidified. It turned from something pliable into something crystalline and hard. The anger I should have felt, the screaming, the crying, it never came. Instead, a strange and terrible calm washed over me. It was the calm of a surgeon before the first incision, the calm of a general surveying a battlefield. I looked up from the stain, met Chloe's wide, feigning innocent eyes, and I smiled. A real smile this time. It didn't reach my eyes. My eyes were arctic. Without a word, I turned. I didn't run. I walked. I walked out of the reception hall, my wine-soaked train whispering behind me, leaving a room of 200 silent, staring people, a hysterical sister, and a complicit mother. I went to my bridal suite, Liam following silently behind me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. He just stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel, as I unzipped the ruined dress and let it fall to the floor in a heap of stained silk and broken dreams. I stepped out of it, leaving it there like a shed skin, and I reached for my backup dress. It was a simple, elegant ivory sheath I had bought for the rehearsal dinner. I slipped it on. I redid my makeup. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bride was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone colder, clearer, and infinitely stronger. I walked back into that reception, my head held high. I took Liam's hand, went straight to the dance floor, and nodded to the band. They struck up a song, and we danced. I smiled, I laughed. I thanked every guest for coming. I radiated a perfect, unassailable grace. I was playing the part of the perfect bride one last time, but the performance wasn't for them anymore. It was for me. It was a declaration. The show was over, and a new one was about to begin. That night, in our hotel suite, the celebration was a distant echo. The scent of lilies from my bouquet filled the air, a ghostly reminder of the day's early promise. Liam fell into an exhausted sleep almost immediately, the emotional toll of the day finally felling him. But I was wide awake. There was no rage, no tears. The time for that was over. That part of me, the part that would have wept and screamed and demanded an apology I would never receive, had been cauterized by the splash of that wine. What remained was a state of absolute, chilling clarity. It was like seeing a complex equation on a blackboard, and suddenly, effortlessly, knowing the solution. For years, my family had operated under a single, unspoken contract. I would be the foundation, and they would be the house. I would provide the stability, the resources, the endless emotional and financial support, and in return, they would simply exist in the space I provided. Chloe's life, her education, her very ability to be this carefree, destructive artist, was a luxury subsidized entirely by me. I wasn't just her sister. I was her patron, her safety net, her bank. The wine wasn't just a stain on a dress. It was a breach of contract. A declaration that my role as the foundation was not just unappreciated, but held in contempt. And a foundation, once compromised, must be condemned. I slipped out of bed and opened my laptop. The screen cast a cool blue light on my face in the dark room. I navigated to the website of our shared bank. It wasn't really a shared account. It was my account, an account I had opened for her and funded with a generous monthly transfer, to which she had a debit card. I called it her grad school stipend. She called it her allowance. I clicked on the transaction history. The last few weeks were a familiar story. $5 for a latte here, $70 for an Uber there, $200 at a boutique I'd never heard of, $400 for concert tickets. It was a map of a life lived without consequence. A life lived on my dime, my labor, my sacrifice. My finger hovered over the mouse. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. Just a quiet, determined sense of purpose. I navigated to the account settings. Freeze all transactions. Block access for cardholder Chloe Miller. Cancel scheduled monthly transfer. Click, click, click. The first domino had fallen. I closed the laptop and got back into bed. For the first time all day, I felt a genuine sense of peace settle over me. I fell asleep to the sound of Liam's steady breathing and the silent, satisfying hum of a system shutting down. I didn't have to wait long. We were on our honeymoon, a secluded beach in Mexico, when the first call came. It was the Monday after the wedding. I was lying in a hammock, the turquoise water lapping at the shore, a novel resting on my chest. I saw my mother's name flash on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text. Ilara, call me. It's an emergency. I took a sip of my cocktail. Another text. Chloe's tuition payment bounced. They're going to withdraw her from the program. Did you forget to make the transfer? Call me now. I didn't forget. I remembered with perfect clarity. I typed back a single, simple sentence. The financial arrangement has been terminated. My phone immediately began to ring again. I silenced it and placed it face down on the table beside me. Liam looked over from his lounge chair, his brow furrowed with concern. Your mum, Chloe's tuition didn't go through, I said, my voice even. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly. Okay, are you okay? I'm wonderful, I said. And the strangest thing was, I meant it. The unraveling, once started, was swift and methodical. The calls from my mother became a frantic, daily barrage. They followed a predictable pattern. First came confusion and feigned concern. Honey, there must be a mistake with the bank. Can you look into it? Then, when I didn't respond, came the pleading. Ilara, please. You can't do this to her. She'll be ruined. Her whole future is on the line. When pleading failed, the anger and guilt-tripping began. This was her specialty. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By being so cruel, your sister made a silly, drunken mistake. Are you really going to destroy her life over a dress? A dress? She had reduced that act of symbolic violence to a wardrobe. Malfunction. It was never about the dress. It was about the intent. It was about the lifetime of small betrayals that had culminated in that one public act of humiliation. They didn't see the act. They were only angry about the consequences. My consequences. I never answered her calls. I responded to the occasional, desperate text with polite, dispassionate, and infuriatingly final statements. Her finances are her own responsibility now. I am no longer in a position to offer support. I wish her the best in navigating this situation. They were the kind of sterile corporate responses you get from a customer service bot. Each one was a brick in the new wall I was building around my life. Back home from our honeymoon, I continued the dismantling. It became a quiet, evening ritual. After dinner, I would pour a glass of tea, open my laptop, and sever another tie. A series of clicks, each one a snip of the scissors, cutting another string of the net that had supported her for so long. I logged into my health insurance portal. There she was, listed as a dependent, remove dependent. A pop-up asked for a reason. I selected no longer eligible. Click .next, the student loan provider for her undergraduate debt. For 5 years, I had been making the automatic monthly payments, a quiet subsidy she had long ago started taking for granted. Cancel automatic payments. Click. I went through my credit cards. She was an authorized user on 2 of them. Her name, Chloe Miller, staring back at me from the screen. Remove authorized user. Click. It wasn't emotional. It was administrative. A cleanup. I was simply correcting a series of long-standing clerical errors. The error was that I had mistaken my sister for my daughter. My responsibility, Error was thinking that my love had to be transactional, that my worth in the family was tied to the size of the checks I could write. The family's reaction escalated in tandem with my actions. When my direct silence became a wall they couldn't penetrate, they changed tactics. They started calling Liam, leaving him long, rambling voicemails at his office. He would come home, his face etched with a weary sympathy for me, and play them. On speaker, "Liam, you have to talk to her," my mother's voice would plead. "She's not thinking clearly. She's being vindictive and controlling. This isn't the Alara we know. You're her husband. You have to make her see reason." They tried to frame my establishment of boundaries as an act of control. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. For years I had been controlled by their expectations, by the unspoken threat that if I didn't comply, if I didn't pay, if I didn't fix, the fragile ecosystem of our family would collapse and it would be my fault. Then came the public front. Comments started appearing on my social media, which I had kept pristine and professional. Under a photo from our honeymoon, Liam and I smiling, the ocean sparkling behind USA. Comment from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Must be nice to be on vacation while your family is in crisis." Some people are so selfish and aren't posted. A passive-aggressive meme on her own page about family turning their backs on their own. They were trying to build a narrative to paint me as the cold-hearted villain, the cruel heiress who had suddenly and inexplicably turned on her poor, struggling artist of a sister. They needed that narrative, because the alternative, the truth, was far too damning. Chloe was not a victim. She was the architect of her own demise, and I had simply stopped providing the construction materials. Through it all, Liam was my rock. He screened the calls. He deleted the comments. He held me at night when the sheer weight of their campaign threatened to crack my resolve. "You know you're doing the right thing," he'd say, his voice firm. "This isn't cruelty, it's consequences. You gave her a choice, and she threw it back in your face." Literally, he was right. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This was an audit, a correction, a final balancing of the books that had been in the red for far too long. I wasn't destroying Chloe's life. I was simply forcing her, for the first time, to live it on her own terms. Weeks turned into a month of silence from me, and a month of escalating chaos for Chloe. The fortress I had built around my new life was holding. The calls and texts had slowed to a trickle, replaced by a sullen, simmering silence from my family. They were waiting for me to break, to feel guilty, to sweep in and fix the mess, just like I always had. But I was discovering something new and intoxicating: peace. A quiet, uncluttered life, free from the constant hum of someone else's manufactured drama. My work improved. My sleep was deep and dreamless. My marriage, free from the strain of my family's demands, blossomed. Chloe, faced with a wall of silence and the terrifying reality of self-sufficiency, made her final, desperate move. She went public. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. A friend sent me a screenshot with a single message: "You need to see this." It was an Instagram post from Chloe. The photo was artfully composed, of course. It was her, sitting by a window in her non-affordable loft, looking wistful and melancholic. The light was perfect. Her hair was perfect. She was holding a mug, a picture of manufactured vulnerability. But it was the caption that was the true work of art. "Sometimes the people you take a bullet for are the ones behind the trigger," it began. Learning that true strength isn't about what you can build, but how you handle it when your foundations are ripped out from under you without warning. Sending love to everyone out there who is fighting their own silent battles and learning to stand on their own 2 feet, even when the ground is shaking. Hashtag family, hashtag betrayal, hashtag finding my own way, hashtag survivor, and then the final, cowardly blow. She tagged me at ELARA Jameson. It was a masterstroke of passive aggression. She hadn't named the specifics, but she didn't need to. To our extended circle of family and mutual acquaintances, the implication was clear. I was the one behind the trigger. I was the one who had betrayed her. She was the brave survivor of my inexplicable cruelty. I stared at the post, at the growing number of sympathetic comments from her friends and my family members. Stay strong, Chloe. We're here for you. I can't believe she would do this to you. The old Alara would have been gutted. She would have felt the sting of public shame, the need to defend herself, to explain. But the new Alara felt nothing. Or rather, she felt one thing, a final surge of resolve. She had tried to humiliate me in private. Now she was trying to do it in public. She had mistaken my silence for weakness. She thought she could use public opinion to shame me back into my old role. She had made one last fatal miscalculation. She had forgotten about the scholarship. It was a prestigious fellowship for promising artists in her graduate program, the Helena Vance Fellowship. It was highly competitive and came with a massive stipend, enough to cover not just her remaining tuition, but her housing and living expenses for the entire year. It was the one financial lifeline I hadn't provided directly, and therefore, the one I hadn't yet been able to cut, but I hadn't been entirely removed from it. A key component of her application, the component that had tipped the scales in her favor, was a glowing 3-page letter of recommendation I had written for her. I had poured my heart into that letter. I wrote about her unique artistic vision, her unwavering dedication to her craft, her resilience in the face of adversity. I had used my own professional reputation and credibility to vouch for her. I had, in effect, co-signed her character. I opened my laptop. I didn't engage with the Instagram post. I didn't block her. I didn't do anything that would give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I opened a new email. I found the contact information for the director of the Helena Vance Foundation. Then, I pulled up 2 documents. First, the letter of recommendation. I had written, I reread my own glowing words, the memory of my naive pride now tasting like ash in my mouth. Second, I pulled up the official email from her university, the one my mother had forwarded me in a panic, stating that due to non-payment of tuition, Chloe Miller's enrollment had been formally withdrawn. My new letter to the foundation was short, professional, and devastatingly factual. To the board of the Helena Vance Foundation, I am writing to you today in regard to my previous letter of recommendation for Ms. Chloe Miller, a recipient of your esteemed fellowship. It has come to my attention that my assessment of Ms. Miller's eligibility and character may no longer be accurate. When I wrote my recommendation, I did so with the belief that she met all the rigorous standards of your program, including the requirement of being an active, enrolled student in good standing at her university. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. Please find attached the official notice of withdrawal from her graduate program, effective as of last month. As she no longer meets the fundamental criteria for the fellowship, I can no longer, in good conscience, uphold my recommendation. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. Sincerely, Alara Jameson Scorti. Attached the university's withdrawal notice. A verifiable, undeniable piece of evidence. And I hit send. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within 48 hours, the foundation had revoked the scholarship. Without the fellowship funds, she couldn't pay the back rent on her loft, or the rent on her student housing. She was served an eviction notice. That was when she finally called me, not to apologize, not to explain, but in a state of pure, primal panic. They kicked me out. She shrieked into the phone, her voice ragged with tears and disbelief. The university, the scholarship, my apartment. They're kicking me out. You have to do something. I stood in my quiet, sunlit home office, looking out at the autumn leaves. In my backyard, I felt a profound sense of calm. The cycle was finally complete. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice even don't. "Hello, Chloe, me," she screamed. "You did this. This is all your fault. You have to fix it." There it was, the core belief of her entire existence. You have to fix it. "No," I said, the word feeling clean and solid in my mouth. "I don't. The choices you made leave you here. The consequences are yours to manage. But I have nowhere to go. I have nothing," she sobbed. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. I was sorry that she had never learned to stand on her own. I was sorry that my help had become a crutch that had ultimately crippled her. But my sorrow was no longer a blank check. "There is nothing I can offer you, but I'm your sister," she cried, the last desperate card she had to play. "Yes," I said softly. "You are, and I wish you the very best. Goodbye, Chloe," and I hung up. I blocked her number, and I felt the last heavy chain fall away. A week later, there was a knock on my door. It was Mark, Chloe's off-again boyfriend from a few years back. He looked tired and deeply uncomfortable. He was holding a plain manila envelope. "Ilara," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Chloe, she asked me to give this to you. She said you needed to know." He handed me the envelope and practically fled from my porch. I took it inside, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. What final, desperate gambit was this? I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter. It wasn't a photograph. It was a form. A patient information form from a women's health clinic. I scanned the details. Patient name, Chloe Miller. And then a box, checked. Procedure, consultation. And next to it, the doctor's neat handwriting. Patient is approximately 6 weeks pregnant. I sank into a chair, the paper trembling in my hand. Pregnant, of course. The final, messy, life-altering consequence. The ultimate problem for the fixer. To fix a baby, a niece or a nephew. A permanent, undeniable tie. For a moment, the old Ilara flickered within me. A wave of guilt, of obligation, washed over me, a child. This changed everything, didn't it? And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. Replaced by that same cold, crystalline clarity from my wedding night. This didn't change everything. It confirmed everything. This was the logical conclusion of a life lived without foresight, without responsibility. And it was not my conclusion to write. It was not my consequence to bear. Her body, her choice, her life. A life I had finally, fully, stepped away from. I felt not a shred of guilt. I felt relief. A profound, soul-deep relief. This was the final test of my new resolve, and I had passed. I walked back to my office. I have a file cabinet where I keep important documents. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single folder labeled simply, Chloe. It contained the printouts of the bank statements, a copy of the email terminating her insurance, the notice of her scholarship revocation, the evidence of my liberation. I took the clinic form, folded it neatly, and slipped it inside the folder with the rest of the documentation. It wasn't a cry for help. It was just one more piece of data. One more proof of a life I was no longer responsible for. I closed the drawer. The click of the metal latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door locking for the final time. The sound of a boundary, forged in fire and wine, holding firm. The sound of me, Ilara Jameson Scott, finally and completely getting free.